I think we're still going to be dealing in 10 years' time with what I've actually written about and talked about as sort of the end of the 9/11 syndrome. When we go back to 9/11 and we see what Al-Qaeda tried to do, they didn't actually intend to have the Twin Towers, for example, fall down, right? They just wanted to hit them. That would have been success. The fact that they actually achieved a much greater level of success than they ever anticipated, sort of created this peer pressure on themselves to say that, well, anything we do next has to be of equal value or of equal impact as the Twin Towers collapse was. That made it difficult for them to do anything smaller. So the unfortunate thing is this sort of inter-terrorist rivalry that exists between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The Islamic State has made a very, very sort of important divergence from Al-Qaeda strategy, which is that we don't suffer from their 9/11 syndrome. We didn't do 9/11, so anything we do, if it works to our cause and has a benefit to us, is okay. It's a success. So we've seen this all over Europe and unfortunately in parts of the United States. The cars, using cars to ram through people. You know, the idea of individual shooters going into nightclubs. Backpacks on buses. These are all things that throughout the 2000s, Al-Qaeda said we can't do. And the Islamic State, their biggest success has been getting the old school terrorism back on the front end of the agenda. So if anything, counterterrorism in the 2020s is going to have to deal with how do we stop these small scale events, which are maybe less bloody or there are fewer numbers of people dying, but they're just that much harder to detect and therefore that much harder to deter. So unfortunately, counterterrorism is going to get more difficult if also on a smaller scale. There are lots of different ones, and people like to talk mostly about climate change, things like that. But the one that I find the most fascinating deals with the space race. The idea that space is going to become a new battle domain, a new combat domain. And I think one of the reasons is because one of the dangers I see in it for the United States and Western allies in particular is that there's a lot of presumption that as drones went, that's how the space race is going to go. That the West has this clear technological, personal capability, talent, superiority advantage that they're going to keep far, far off into the future. With drones, that's actually true. But in the space race, I see that not necessarily being perfectly analogous. That there are at least 3 countries, namely India, China, and Russia. And even India we often think of as an ally, but we're talking about competition. Right? There's a lot of military applications that will benefit science, that will benefit diplomacy, that will benefit political and economic development, that any country is going to compete with any other country. So in the future, moving forward as an emerging threat, the space race matters so much because I don't think the United States and its Western allies, I don't think it's going to be able to keep that advantage the way it does with drones. So that right when we get off to that launching point where we see space become a true combat command, a combat domain, we're going to see 4 or 5 competitors in that domain that are actually quite co-equal when it comes to their technological abilities, their capabilities, what their strategies may be. We won't be able to just offset them or neutralize them automatically. So that leaves a lot of interesting new work to do in the future. North Korea was sort of an amalgamation of 2 very unique things. On the political side, it was almost this surrealistic, fantastical, Willy Wonka type cult of personality, demagogic government. And there really aren't many of those around the world. The only one that even for me remotely comes close has been Turkmenistan. But unfortunately, in North Korea's case, it combined that type of government with the capability to acquire, build, develop, and ultimately have launchable nuclear weapons. So combining those 2 things together, a state that has this weird Willy Wonka demagogic cult of personality government and the technological capability to have nuclear weapons on the global stage, thankfully that's actually fairly unique to just North Korea. And I don't see any other states trying to copy that model, thankfully. I don't know if the Islamic State's ever going to be dead in the sense of it will become dead to us geopolitically. We'll weaken it enough to make it irrelevant as a global entity, but it will probably live long after that fact at the regional level. So the Islamic State's going to stay at least impactful across the greater Middle East in the area that's known as the Levant, Syria and Iraq and down through. These kinds of terrorist groups just don't disappear overnight, and it may seem to us in America like they've been here for a long time, but relatively speaking, compared to other groups, they haven't been here that long. So I anticipate probably for another generation at least, while we'll always continuously work against them, we have a tendency, once we get rid of their global threat capability, we sort of start to forget about them again as long as they're not operating in the United States. So it'll become a global problem to just a Middle East problem. And once it's a Middle East problem, America will start to sort of forget about it. It's a relatively difficult question to answer, but I think in terms of what the future is going to bring, especially in our fields of global security and strategic intelligence, I think we're going to see the United States move away from the so we'll have reduced formal engagement in wars around the world. But unfortunately, we're going to see increased informal engagement at a localized or regional level, and sometimes probably out of public eye unless something bad happens. So we'll find out about things where people in our field, whether it be diplomats or whether it be military units, getting killed in skirmishes that we maybe not even were aware there's a skirmish to be had, and we weren't aware of their activity or our involvement or what our purpose is. And we've had some time now to think about the fact that we've spent 15 years openly, explicitly in wars, and we've had an entire industry of academics grow up complaining about that environment. So I'm fascinated to see as we move forward for the United States into the future, what do we consider to be a worse environment? Two formally declared wars that we think are ambiguous in what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, or not having those, but instead of it leading to peace, it just leads to now a sort of more intelligence-oriented operation where we're trying to influence skirmishes all over the globe in 5, 6, 7 spots at a smaller scale, but maybe with a lot of critical geopolitical and transnational implications for them.